Hello everyone and welcome to This Nintendo Life episode 189. My name is NBZ and I'm here, I'm back. I've never went anywhere, still haven't gone anywhere. We're closing in, Bali, on like the 1 year quote-unquote anniversary of like everyone being stuck indoors. But who would have thought we'd come to this? But we're here. It's been snowing apparently in Edinburgh. My sister sent me a picture of a lake that was frozen over and people skating on it and then hockey being played on it. And she's just standing on this lake. And I'm like, Jesus, man, it's cold up there.
Yeah, we like in central Edinburgh. So obviously like cities tend to get less snow than the country I find in Scotland. And even central Edinburgh got a good like 5-6 inches of snow, and yeah, I had to like defrost my car, and it took a very, very long time.
No, because my parents and my sister drove back up there, and they went and parked the car, and then the next morning, basically the car was immovable because there was snow everywhere around it, and so my dad had to like walk to go get shopping instead of actually using the car. So yeah. It seems like rough times up there.
It genuinely felt like very briefly, like North American levels of kind of snowfall. And what I mean by that is normally I find in Scotland, once snow has fallen, like 3 days later, all the snow will be gone again because the temperature will go back to 5-6 degrees centigrade or so and it'll melt. Whereas we had like a solid week of freezing temperature during the day, and as a result the snow didn't move for a long time. I think it's finally going to move in like a couple of days, but it's been really thick and just stayed there the whole time, which is very unlike the UK.
Yeah. Now, I know you don't have a garden, but have you attempted to go outside and maybe make a snowman somewhere, or is that not on the cards?
Not really, no. I mean, it would be a case of just going to the local park, and I'm sure the youngsters out there will have beaten old Bally, so yeah, all the good snow will have gone.
Or go back to your parents' house. I remember we made a sick snowman at your house back in the day.
We had great times. We'd like go in the garden and make like a line in the snow, and then be like, right, snowball fight. That's your side. Then just absolutely lather them at each other.
Yeah. Good times. Good times indeed. But yes, sadly, not as much snow here. There was some, but it just didn't.
Yeah, London did have snow, which is unusual. So yeah.
But oh well. I'll
benefits of climate change.
Yeah. Wild. Anyway, here we are. We're back. Time to talk video games and how we've been playing them and what we've been doing. Bally, what's going to happen in today's show?
We've got a 2-segment show this time. First segment, we're going to be talking about a lot of games that we have been playing, and then for the second segment, we've got some of your emails.
Yes, and please stay tuned to the end of the show because it's time for another Backlog Club. So we're going to be announcing the nominees for a poll that will go up on our Patreon, and if you want to go and cheat, you can go look now because it'll probably be live at the time that this episode is live, but you can go and see what we have up for offer, or you can just wait until the end of the episode and find out. Surprise.
And if you're new to the show, MBZ, and you don't know what a Backlog Club is, what is a Backlog Club?
Well, it's basically where we decide on a game, or we choose 3 nominees for a game. Our community on Patreon votes for which one we're going to play, and then we try and play it all together as a community, and encourage everyone to play at the same time, and send in emails, their thoughts on the game, and then we just have a big discussion about it. So it, in some ways, similar to the Mario stuff that we were doing, but slightly different because that was a bit of a different structure. But Backlog Club is it's about going in deep about every aspect of a video game. So stay tuned to the end for that. But otherwise, we're going to kick things off with the video games we've been playing. Bally, I broke out of the impossible lair. I did it. Or as the game tells me, the not so impossible lair, because I didn't do it like the quote unquote legit way. But we had both kind of been talking about this last time, and you had finished the game, obviously, and you were telling me like how rough of a time you're having in the impossible lair, and I tend to agree. Like it's definitely a sharp upturn in difficulty, and it's an interesting setup where you can have this certain number of bees, and then you can just keep redoing sections to increase your amount, so that when you get to the next part, you will have a better score to work with, essentially, like a better barrier. And so, like, the final section, the first time I got there, actually the second to last, so stage 3, I got there with 5 bees, and I was like, okay, I need to improve on this. And so I spent a little bit of time improving on that, and I managed to get up to 15, which was solid. And then the first try I did with 15 bees from that, I basically went through all of stage 3, got to stage 4 with 0 bees, which means that last boss fight, I had nothing. And so I beat that entire last boss with no bees and just collecting Laylee, I guess? Laylee, yes. When she was flying away. And then the entire last section I did with no bees as well.
Yeah.
That's
basically what I did as well. I do think the final boss fight, and then the final area is doable with like 0 bees.
Yes.
It's that middle section, I think, is the toughest bit.
I actually think stage 2 with the ice, and like there's a certain part which I found really frustrating because of how slow it was, which is standing on things that go up and down.
Oh yeah, that's the hardest area.
Yeah, that
when you fall off, it resets you back a few meters as well. It's like drove me crazy.
Yeah, so it's like the platforms that you're standing on, there's the ones where there's like beams shooting at you, and you have to kind of stand and then move to the side to avoid them, and move to the side to avoid them, and then roll off underneath onto the next one. There's also the glass ice elevator, I should say, that goes slowly upwards.
What a fun mechanic that is.
Yeah, it's just like there's razor blades on either side of you. You're standing on ice. It's going really slowly upwards, and as you go up, there are other razor blades going left and right really slowly, and so you have to either duck before you get hit by one, or jump over them, make sure you're like within the area so you don't take another hit, or you basically arrange yourself so you're on one side where they won't be. That was really rough. That section sucks, frankly, and I just didn't enjoy it. And I think it's mainly just created to force you to lose a bunch of bees in a lot of ways, because it is somewhat unpredictable and not very easy to maneuver around. And then like they throw in the left and right kind of sentry guys who have the rotating helicopter tops, and sometimes you're like this kept happening to me, but there will be a slight little hitbox of their helicopter top still poking through the ice, and I just got hit by that a ton, and it was very annoying.
It's that balance of because every time you get hit, you've got a few invincibility frames, and it's about, because you're trying to get through this level, if you take a hit, when you get hit, you have to weigh up, do I stop and carefully get past the next obstacle, or do I use this little window of invincibility frames to just kind of try and speed through the next section, not the next section but the next few meters, and that balance is so difficult to constantly weigh up what's the best thing to do.
The other really tricky part that I didn't even mention is if you leave the ground on that ice elevator, it will start to go down again. And so when you jump over something, the elevator like goes down slightly until you land back on it, and then it slowly starts going back up again. So that really, for me, that was the worst section of the entire level. And I just wanted to get past it as soon as possible. So as soon as I had a decent score after that section, I was like, well, I'm never doing that section again. And thankfully, like stage 3, not terrible. And then again, the last boss, I think because I spent so much time fighting the stage 3 boss in terms of practicing against him, most of the patterns were the same for the final one. So it was okay. And I do think it's interesting.
You can really like preempt what's happening and shut down, do an attack on the boss before it even gets out an attack often. They just kind of speed through it.
Totally, yeah. Because he kind of stands to the side sometimes and is like slowly about to put out a ball or whatever, and then you can bonk him on the head.
Which you cannot do in Tropical Freeze, so maybe that's another way in which this game improves with its boss fights. I
mean, yeah, in some ways, totally. I haven't yet watched the speed run for this game. I know you have, Bally.
Oh, it's worth it. It is worth it. There's like this technique where it's hard to explain, but you almost do like a ground pound down, and then they jump off like really far at 45 degrees to the right, and you can like skip huge chunks. It's bizarre, but obviously it's just been put in there for speedrunners.
Totally, yes. But yeah, I was kind of wondering, like, I guess they beat the bosses much faster in terms of being able to, avoid those certain animations by like getting them hit before they even start to do them and things like that. But I don't know if that's the case. So I'll probably go ahead and watch. I think IGN put up a devs react to a speedrunner version, so I'll probably watch that one and see how it rolls. But yeah, I think this game is really good. I will say the second half of the game, level-wise, I don't know that it really changes much up. It continues to be solid level design, but I don't know it's that inventive or new. It kind of has a lot of these ideas early on, and I think that's kind of what got me early on, was like, oh, this is really well designed and well thought out. And then it doesn't introduce that much more new. Like, you continue to see, oh, now this level is frozen over again. Oh, now it's underwater again, because like they kind of repeat some of the tricks of the alternate versions of the levels. Some of them are a bit more creative, but for the most part, it is like, okay, yeah, let's just go through these levels. They're all good and they're all fun and well made, but I was kind of getting to the point where I was like, okay, let's just wrap this up now, because it's a lot, right? It's 40 levels.
It's a long game. 40 levels is, a lot for that format of game. It feels a little bit longer than a game like Tropical Freeze or other Donkey Kong Countries, and maybe could have been a bit shorter.
Part of it is also the overworld puzzles where you're figuring out how to change things, and frankly, that was maybe my favorite part of the game in some weird ways. Like, I think the platforming's fantastic, but I really like this idea of a Zelda-style overworld in order to unlock new levels, right? It's totally, for me, it's much more appealing than the Donkey Kong version of collect all this stuff in the level in order to unlock a new level. In this game, it's like, oh, do the overworld stuff, which is totally removed and separate from the levels in order to unlock a new level. Like, I
mean, you've still got the coins to unlock levels,
gates,
so they're still, it's almost doing both rather than one or the other.
A little bit, but what I will say is I had enough coins by, like basically before I'd even unlocked the final bonus area with the last 3 levels, I had maybe 25 coins. I only needed to get 10 more after that, because I had been focusing on getting them, and they are fun to find, right? Like, I do think they are generally hidden quite well, and are
I definitely got more as I got through the game. Like, early on, I was barely getting any coins, thinking, God, these are hard to get, and then I just got much better at them, or maybe the levels got easier, I don't know, but a combination of the two.
Yeah, there are certainly some levels where they are much more obvious and easy to find, and yeah, I just exploited those levels the most. I was like, okay, I got a full 10 on this one, so that has kind of helped me in terms of when the total amount you can get is like 200, and I think I ended up with 120. I think you had the same, you said, but that was quite easy to do, and it wasn't too much of a hassle, and I wasn't too worried about it. But I think one of the other things was, like, as soon as I didn't have to get them anymore, I did a lot less exploring of the levels and was much more mainlining it to the end, so maybe that contributed to that feeling of maybe the level design isn't as good, because I wasn't as engaging with it as much as I was before. But yes, I would recommend this game a lot. I think I don't think the Impossible Lair is all that tricky. Maybe it's coming off of Cyber Shadow and like the comparison there being favorable.
I think Cyber Shadow is harder, honestly.
By far, yeah, I would totally agree. Even though like the checkpointing can be rough on the Impossible Lair, like you have a lot of hits, and you can, like, the more you do a section, the more you realize, okay, I know exactly what's going to happen here, and I can get through this with a better amount. And then by the end, honestly, I didn't need many bees by the end in order to get through. Like, I had 0, in fact. In that last section, you can do it.
The Laylee trick is considerably makes it considerably easier than I think you originally realized, and the genuine Impossible Lair for that reason is very hard, obviously, but probably not as hard as maybe other games to speedrun or something.
Totally. I think so. One of the things I didn't like was if you enter the lair and then you decide, oh, the boss has hit me 4 times straight away, I'm like, okay, can I quit and go out? If you do that, it counts as a try, and so I don't actually know what my final proper one was, because I did that a few times. I think it was hovering around like 15 or 16 on the screen, so I'm imagining I did like 12 maybe runs to do the whole thing, which is pretty good, all things considered, right? Like, I don't think it's like impossibly impossible. And I know that people were talking to you on Twitter about how they just never beat it and never went back to it.
Yeah, I still think it's a little rich to have it before credits, but it's not too bad.
It's not awful. It's doable, and I think that the boss is the kind of boss that his patterns just build on each other, right? You fight him 4 times, but because it all builds on it, you will eventually understand and be able to avoid and dodge all of them without too much trouble. It's mainly the level part that's the tough area of it. But yeah, glad I wrapped it up. Really, really positive feelings on it overall, and glad that we got around to this game. Very, very cool. So that's the Impossible Lair. Bali, you have been swallowing things whole, I've heard.
Swallowing so many things. I've been playing Donut County, which came out in 2018, I want to say. Summer 2018.
I actually played it at launch when it came out. Oh, yeah, I did, yeah.
Wow. And yeah, you play as a sinkhole, working your way through kind of these vague kind of levels, sucking up things, and when things fall in your hole, the hole becomes bigger and you suck up even bigger things, and you keep going in the level. And there's some nice little light puzzle elements in the game, which I think is really nice. And I just think
I seem to remember something about popcorn popping out at some point, right?
Yeah, there's like you can take like a fire, you suck up a fire, and then you move it next to the corn, and the corn becomes popcorn. And then because you've created lots of popcorn, that makes the sinkhole get really large. And there's things like that. There's like a one where you suck up some water, and then you add in seasoning, and you have to then get another type of seasoning without getting a cockroach in it, and then you're basically heating it up to turn it into a soup, and then you feed the soup to like this bird to make a door open. Like, it's
lunacy. Truly.
But that's honestly about as complicated as the puzzles get. It's really it's really not too bad, and the most fun. The game is at its best when it is just utilizing that fun physics engine, and stuff is falling in the hole, and it's just very satisfying. This game makes me realize I just want more games that just come up with a very simple physics system, have a very light puzzle element, so you're never really getting stuck, and just saying, yeah, this is a 1 to 2 hour experience, and have a blast. In that sense, it really, and I should say, like, both the gameplay but the art style as well really reminded me of What the Golf. Like, it's a very What the Golf physics kind of thing, and combined with the animals and some of the writing, it felt like What the Golf combined with a bit of Night in the Woods or something. And I'd say that the color scheme is actually very Night in the Woods as well. Like, it's very that kind of town vibe, as it were. And I just think that physics engine never got old in the 1 to 2 hours that, like, this game takes place in. I do think the game, there's quite a lot of dialogue in the game, especially late on, and I think the game is, like I said, the game is at its best when you are that sinkhole sucking up things and doing these light puzzles, and there are periods for such a short game where there's quite a lot of text to kind of scroll through, and the writing is fun, and the story is bizarre and doesn't make much sense, and that's fine.
There's a talking raccoon, right?
Talking raccoon with a sinkhole, and there's like a big bad raccoon as well, and you have to fight the big bad raccoon. And it's kind of like, I get that the story is zany, and I get that the writing is funny, but give me a little quip, and then let's move on to the next thing. Let's not have like this kind of overly developed story.
Right, it's just not really necessary with the type of game it is.
Yeah, I think for such a short game, and for how zany this story is, it's a bit bizarre sometimes how long some of the writing is. But like, this is on Game Pass, this is on Switch, like, this is a very, very fun game, and I guarantee it will be like nothing you have ever played before, guaranteed.
Well, I don't know, I think it has Katamari vibes, right? In terms of that game is much more about like collecting objects to enlarge and enlarge and enlarge, and this is almost the inverse of that. It's like dropping objects into a hole to enlarge the hole so that it consumes everything, right?
Yeah.
So I'd say like that's probably the biggest point of influence, or like if you want to compare it to something, that's probably where I'd go to.
The satisfaction of sucking up a tiny blade of grass, and then by the end of the same level sucking up a house and the cliff face next to the house is just, this is hilarious and awesome. And yeah, it ran really smoothly on my Xbox One S. I'm sure it would be fine on Switch. Did you play it on Switch, MBZ? Or
no, it didn't come out on Switch at the time. I got it on Steam when it launched. Well, I didn't get it at launch. I think I got it like when it was on sale, like around that year. But I played it that year.
So like,
yes.
I hope it would run well on Switch. I mean, a game like What the Golf ran fine on Switch, I believe. So like, Yeah, it's definitely worth checking out. And yeah, let's keep beating the drum for more 1 to 2 hour games, please, because they are so good when done well. So yeah, more of those, please.
Totally. Yeah, there's a few of those on Switch. I think. Gosh, what's the puzzle game that we played? Gardens Between.
Gardens Between.
That's phenomenal. That's
Yeah.
one of my favorites. And yeah. These
Totally.
type of experiences are brilliant because you can just sit down on a Saturday afternoon and be like, I'm just going to play this start to finish and feel satisfied and have some kind of weird experience. And Donut County is definitely a weird experience.
Very weird. Very
did
weird,
you
but well
like?
made.
I remember Giant Bomb talking about the text messaging in that game. I can't remember anything about it, but that's just come to my brain for some reason. Is there text messaging in this game?
Yeah, you can hit either reply or hit a little emoji button.
Yes, I think they were going wild over the emojis is what it was.
Yeah,
like that,
I mean, there is one button you can press and it will do one emoji. And yeah, that is cool because it does feel like texting. But I got a bit bored of that mechanically later on, but it's cool initially.
I feel like this was the year when texting was a thing because I think Tokyo Mirage Sessions came out, and like I swear to God, there's never been better text messaging in a game than Tokyo Mirage Sessions. Like some of the most real localization or writing for text messages between people I have ever seen in a video game. It's probably the best thing about that entire game. Honestly, so good.
Yeah. And then we finally played a little game called Among Us.
Oh yeah, never heard of that
you
before.
might have heard of it. It came to Switch like end of last year, a few months ago.
It was part of the direct, wasn't it? It was like the big stinger at the end of the last direct at the end of the year. It was like, and Among Us is finally here. And I believe it's been number one on the eShop forever until 3D World plus Bowser's Fury came out and just took it off the top spot. But that's because it's really fucking cheap and also the biggest game in the world. So makes sense, really.
So yeah, we played with like Alex and Shaq and our friend Charlie as well, and like a 5-player Zoom call, which was fun the other night. And I think Shaq and Alex had played it before, but we hadn't. And we knew how it worked. We've seen streams.
I've watched it. I watched it's kind of funny. Did a video where Greg had never played it before, and I watched that, and so I had a decent idea of what was going on. And I've seen some streams. Like it's almost impossible to avoid footage or stuff about Among Us generally. So you know, like there's this sort of cultural osmosis that has happened in terms of, you know, games like Fall Guys and Among Us. Like I know enough about them despite never having touched them before. You know? And
another of our friends wasn't able to make the call, so we were with 5 people, which I don't think is the best number. It'd be nice to have like 6, 7 or 8 for sure. So I definitely want to try it again.
I think it maxes out at 10. 10 it seems to be the number that like is the if you can get that group, that is great. Obviously it's hard for people, like it's not easy to get like a whole group of 10 people to do Among Us at once, but I think for streamers it's a lot easier because they have big communities and like they're all playing at the same time and that type of thing.
Definitely.
And the ship seems like it's designed for a larger group of people because there are a lot of areas and there's a lot of space to explore, and so it seems like if you have a smaller group like we did, sometimes people will die and it will be like 2 minutes until someone even finds the body because they're just off doing something else and there's just not enough people to go and find the other person, you know?
Yeah, so if the imposter already kills 2 people and then the remaining 3 people are there discussing, you know, who to accuse, the game's over very quick. And that happened quite a few times.
Where it's literally just one discussion and it's over.
Yeah.
Which is kind of a bummer because the game is kind of built around like someone gets killed, we have a discussion. Someone else gets killed, we have another discussion. Like it's almost built on that escalation, and it's kind of hard to have that escalation when you don't have enough to work with, you know?
Yeah. My favorite moment was, I think you and Charlie were already dead, MBZ, and it was me, Alex, and Shaq left, and I was the imposter, and I was just noobing around, just being like, I don't know what I'm doing, I guess I'll do this, and I think Alex accused me, and he's just like, Shaq, I was in this room doing this, Bally was doing this thing, and I was doing this game, and Shaq's like, okay, what were you doing, Bally? And I'm like, oh god, here we go, right. I just said like I'm doing some mini game that did this, and then I was in this room. I can't remember.
Bally basically gives like the least convincing argument I've ever heard in my life. Like he is flaking like hell. Like it is so clear and obvious that Bally is the imposter. And then
Shaq says to Alex like, "Yeah, Alex, I don't believe a word that you're saying. I'm ejecting you." And I was like, "Wow, and it's one of those things where like." And this is the same with a game like Avalon or Resistance or even Coup. Like, I think beginners do have a level of an advantage in some senses where it's very easy to pretend. And in this case, I really didn't really know what I was doing massively, but you can look like you have no idea what you're doing when you might have more idea than you first perceive. And that can be really hard for experienced players to judge whether they think you're an imposter or not. So it works in that way. I've played Avalon a lot, and I probably prefer a game like Avalon, but at the same time, I've not played Among Us yet with 10 people. I think that's the strength where it can scale up, but obviously Avalon can scale up as well. It's just I think both these games are great if you just get the right situation. And yeah, 5 wasn't the best number, but we still had a couple of really hilarious moments, which was fun. So yeah, want to play more.
Yeah, I think the difference with those social deduction games in person is that you don't really have anything to go off aside from the person's demeanor and their ability to argue and their kind of deflection tactics and those types of things, right? Versus within Among Us, you can have someone who is like, well, I actually saw this concrete thing happen within the game, therefore I can deduce.
But that's only your word.
That is only your word, true, but I think it gives something a bit more concrete rather than just relying on people's ability.
No, I disagree, because in Resistance and Avalon, you can say this person, everyone is open voting. You can see the way in which people are voting on who should go on a mission. So you can say person X has voted that this person should go on this mission, this person should go on this mission, therefore I think that they think this. Whereas Among Us, you're saying, I saw this person do this thing, and that's just your word, versus you can call out votes in a game like Avalon or Resistance.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. I guess I mean more along the lines of, like, it's much easier for people to corroborate with each other, right? Like, people saying the 4 of us were in this same room at the same time doing this, and there's a lot more to work with in terms of where people are and what people are actually doing on a moment-to-moment basis versus, like, the kind of binary, non-binary choices in Avalon, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of what I was getting at. But yes, it is very similar to those types of games, and I've played those types of games before. And this one just, I guess, was the one that took off and did really well.
Yeah, it's very much a video game version of that, and at the moment I wouldn't say it's much more than that, but that's still a very solid format for a game, and I can see why it is so successful.
Yeah, it's cool. The next thing that we're going to talk about is a game from the Super Nintendo Online service, a thing that I dip into quite a bit, actually. I dipped in...
It's got some new obscure announcements I saw the other day, like that Caveman game.
Yes, so there were a few. I think it's called Prehistoric Man.
Prehistoric Man.
But I'm on this journey since I was 4 years old, maybe, when we were at school, prep school, and I walked into a classroom and someone was playing this Caveman game on the TV. And I have never been able to figure out what the Caveman game is. All I remember is that you start off by walking on the back of a dinosaur, and then you jump off the dinosaur's head, and then something else happens. And I've been searching long and high for this Caveman game.
You think this might be it?
I don't know about so remember I played Joe and Mac, I think last year, maybe it was 2019. God, years. Yes, it was 2019 because we were in America at Ali T's wedding, and I played Joe and Mac when I was there, and that wasn't it. It wasn't the game, and I'm in this eternal search for this caveman dinosaur game.
I think it was Imran Khan on Kind of Funny was saying, like, there's an unreasonably large number of caveman games on Super Nintendo. I think there's 3 or 4. So you must be getting warm. So
yeah, and I don't even know what console it was. I don't remember what the situation was. I just have this searing memory of my mind of this TV playing this game, and we were all playing it. Maybe it was on the computer, maybe it was on something else, but it was this caveman jumping on this dinosaur's back. Anyway, I still haven't found it, but Prehistoric Man is coming out. I'm going to play that as well. I'm going to see if I can figure out if that was it. Who knows? My search will continue forever and ever. But yes, that's one of the games that's coming. There's also Psycho Dream, I believe, which is another kind of side scroller. I do appreciate, like, the side scrollers, because those are the ones I'll just jump into and just play the whole way through, which is the game I'm going to talk about in a second. But yeah, the stuff they've been putting out has tended to be more random, more deep cut, more the type of thing that if it came out on Wii U Virtual Console, no one would pay money for, right? Like, Super Valis 4 drops on Wii U Virtual Console in, like, May of 2014, for example, if it did, back then. Like, that sells probably 300 copies maximum, right? Like, no one is going there looking for that stuff unless you're people like me. And even I wouldn't go and pay £7 for that game that I have no...
The only reason you're playing these games is because they're, like, included in this wider price.
Exactly, and that's why like it doesn't bother me, but I find it weird that all these people. I probably shouldn't, because most of the internet like don't care deeply about the kind of library of these older consoles in a way that other people who are very into it do. Like, they just want Earthbound and they just want the big names, right? Which is understandable, but like, Nintendo have given us pretty much all the big names on Super Nintendo that matter anyway, right? You've got the triumvirate of Metroid, Mario, and Zelda. They're all there. Yeah. Obviously, it would be nice for Square Enix to give us some Final Fantasies or Chrono Trigger, but like, look at what has been happening with these third-party companies. Like, Konami has put out the Castlevania collection. They're not going to put Super Castlevania 4 on there because they want you to go and spend 20 quid on the Castlevania collection. Same with Capcom and Mega Man, right? Like, they want you to go out and buy their own versions on their own collections, and that's why they're not going to give those bigger games like Mega Man X to the Super Nintendo service. So that's just kind of the way it's happened, and I actually really appreciate that they put these random things on here. One of the ones that came out on the last batch was a firefighter game, which I've played a little bit of, but I want to get back to it, where you literally go inside a building, you have a hose, and there's fire everywhere, and you have to save 5 people in each level. And it's this really cool, like, weird idea, back when video games didn't know what they were, and like back when people were trying to still figure things out, and not everything was a shooter, not every kind of mechanic was like, here's a gun, kill people, which video games have in many ways just evolved into. Like, you would never see a game like that today, and so I really appreciate getting these deep cut weird games, and yes, so Super Valis 4 is the game that I'm going to talk about really quickly. Not a huge amount to say about it, because
how was 1 through 3?
Amazing, truly. So I was looking into this a bit. So the Valis series, originally a PC Engine series, and so this was a Super Nintendo port of Valis 4, which was originally on the PC Engine. However, it's basically a totally different game from the original Valis 4. I think partially because the Super Nintendo, like, not as powerful hardware, and therefore couldn't do some of the stuff it was doing. Either that, or they just decided to design a much more basic version. Like, the other version had a bunch of extra stuff, like level design seemed a lot sharper and better. Like, there was a level up system, I believe, like RPG style progression. So this is much more pared back. It's much more just a side-scrolling, straight-ahead action game. And you play as Lena, who's like a warrior, and she can upgrade, like, get armor, and she has like certain... You can pick up weapons along the way that are one-time use, or like limited use, so you'll have like 20 arrows that you have on your special, and so when you run out, they've all gone. But you can also choose to like swap those over. So if you are using arrows but you want to swap to something else, you will use something else, but it won't swap between them. It will overwrite it. So it's in your interest, I guess, to use all of your stuff up before you swap in another thing, because if you swap in another thing, you've got 15 arrows left. Well, those 15 arrows are gone now. It's going to overwrite them, essentially. So it's a little bit of management with that. To be honest with you, I didn't use a lot of the special moves. I was mainly just walking ahead, using my sword to kill stuff. And, you know, if you do get the armor, that increases your defense and how much damage you do, I believe. So that kind of helps in terms of taking things out, but there's not too much interesting, right? It's I guess it is themed around like demons and stuff as kind of your main enemies, and there's almost a Greek kind of mythological thing in terms of the armor she's wearing, and it's kind of a melange of influences going on. But there's a lot of sections of levels where you're kind of just walking right, and there aren't any enemies, and there's not much platforming, and you're kind of just walking in a straight line, and then a random enemy will pop up, and you'll kill it. And so, yes, it's not very interesting from a level design perspective. I really like the animation. The animation is very cool. Like, she has some cool kind of ways in which she moves. Like, you can double tap to run, which again is one of my least favorite things. But I forgive this because it's an old game,
so
right?
So many games of the time did that, I bet.
Yes, I'm sure they did, but like I do forgive it for that, and it's definitely one of those games where it becomes unfair by the end. It probably only took me 2 hours total, but the final boss, I was just like, rewind, back to this, rewind, because like the amount of leeway you have and how perfect you have to be versus how much health the boss has. Like, the boss has like 7 invisible health bars because you fight through a boss rush of like all the other bosses before you fight him, and then you fight him and you hit him a ton and his health doesn't start going down. It's like do you remember the end of Fire Emblem 7 where you fight the final boss and its HP is like question mark, question mark, question mark?
Yes.
And only once you do a certain amount of damage does it get into the range where it starts actually doing damage.
Yeah.
It's kind of like that, where like his health bar is question mark, question mark, question mark, and then eventually, like after fighting him for 5 minutes, suddenly his HP bar starts going down. And it's like, well, I've been hitting him all this time, and all of a sudden his HP starts going down now. It's a little weird. But yeah, I think it's fine as a curiosity historically. I think it's interesting to know, the history of the series and that it was on this other platform and that they brought it over and kind of balked the version for Super Nintendo. It's just not as interesting a version. It has some nice sprite work, as I said. Like, there's this big tiger boss who looks really cool, but the animation is quite stilted on those enemies as opposed to your main character. So it feels a little bit of a mismatch. But yeah, I would recommend, if people are interested in finding something different and weird, just checking out for the sake of historical curiosity on Super Nintendo Online. And this is the thing with save states and rewind features on that thing is it just makes so many of these games way more approachable, right? Because
and much shorter, like 2 hours.
Totally,
this would have been
exactly
like a 6-hour marathon otherwise.
Yeah, maybe. And I would have got frustrated and been like, this is too hard, and I wouldn't have finished it if I was playing this as a blockbuster rental when I was like 10 or whatever.
Will we ever see a rewind feature on modern difficult games?
Damn,
Prince of Persia.
Yeah, no, that's a good
you know
point.
what I mean? Because to this day people talk about, I really like this game, but that boss was just too hard, and I didn't like X because of Y. And if someone could say, yeah, I got to that boss and I just rewound, I mean, sure, it would create the same assholes who backlash against the people who want an easy mode on Demon Souls or whatever. But who cares? Like, let's make. It seems like if the aim is to make games more accessible, it seems like a no-brainer. Why not?
Yes, I think it's probably harder for newer games, like big, like imagine Spider-Man Miles Morales and all their rendering and stuff like that. Like,
but
is there enough memory?
Consoles are more powerful than they used to be. Like, I'm sure
true.
We're getting to a point where it's technically doable.
Yeah, I wonder how much. I mean. This is a good example of a modern game that does this and is great. Is the Forza series, right?
Oh,
like literally you rewind in that game.
Yes.
So like that game certainly does it, but I wonder if it's easier because when you're, like those games look great, but you look at the crowds in those games and they're literally like, flat people essentially. So there's.
I mean, I'm very interested this generation what the crowds will look like, because
totally
driving games have to kind of run at 60 and look smooth and all these things, but yeah.
Yeah.
I meant for like a third-person action game.
Yeah, I know what you mean. That's kind of why I brought up Spider-Man as an example of like, you're rendering all of this stuff. Do you have enough memory and cache to then just be like, okay, let's just zip back 2 minutes to where I was before?
Or if at some point they could actually make it like a system-level thing, a bit like on SNES Online,
Yeah. I wonder if that's possible these days. Because I love that feature on these old games. And I think it's kind of necessary for some of these old games, frankly.
Massively, yeah.
But yeah. I'm excited to check out. It's the 17th, I believe, the new games come out. I want to go back to that Firefight. I can't remember what it's called, but that one seemed pretty neat, and I would like to play through that too. So, some cool, weird stuff coming to that service. Talking about cool, weird stuff, let's talk about Kuukiyomi. Consider it. A game I heard of courtesy of James Jones on RFN, always talking about weird Japanese games.
Is it worth considering?
It's definitely worth considering, yeah. So, how do I explain this? I mean, I actually brought up this article that I found. I was just kind of looking about stuff about this game, because when I first started, I was like, what the fuck is going on here? Like, I was really kind of confused, because it is...
What system is this on?
This is on Switch. So I bought this on sale on Switch. It was like £2 or something on sale. It's a really short game, but it's in some ways replayable like a WarioWare. I think WarioWare is the best point, the easiest point of comparison for this game. So Kuukiyomi in Japan, like, let me just read this thing that I found. Okay. So this is from an article from BBC Work Life, and this starts: when you step on an escalator, do you stand to one side to let others pass? When someone in the room says it's hot, do you open a window? If you ask someone on a date and they stare at you blankly, do you withdraw the invitation? If you don't do any of these things, some unfortunate news: you cannot, quote, read the air. Knowing the unspoken rules governing social life requires comprehensive understanding of your environment, whatever the setting. It's a skill that's valuable anywhere in the world. But in Japan, where communication tends to be indirect, it is elevated to another level. Reading the air Kuukiyomi, or Kuukiyomu in Japanese, is a constant exercise, and misreading the air can blow business deals or ruin relationships. In Japan, Kuukiyomu is grappled with in everything from facial recognition, technology, to video games, showing how ingrained it is in daily life. So, with that context, basically, it's called Consider It, but also you can pun that to be like, considerate. Are you a considerate person, right? So it's kind of punning on that. It's taking this idea of you're going to be put in these social situations. So, for example, you're sitting on a train and it shows these other two people who are next to each other, and it says together across their faces. And so you have to move your character to the side so they can sit together on the train, because you're kind of like in the middle on this bench. So you move to the side and they sit down together. And then it moves on to the next one. So all of these are little WarioWare kind of style mini games where you are thinking about, okay, what do I do next? One of them is like
being socially awkward, the game.
Kind of. And it's like, okay, we're going out today, and it's a picture of you with your girlfriend, and you and you're like, oh, where are we going to go? And there's two options. There's Robocon, which is like a convention for robots, or there's Romcom, and it's like, let's take her to the Romcom instead of Robocon. And then later on, you're walking with a robot girlfriend, and you have to take her to Robocon instead of the Romcom. So like, it kind of, it plays on the things that is set up previously, which is pretty clever. And so there's a bunch of these scenarios, everything from like, there's a kid who's up at Christmas night and Santa's in the room, and as the kid you have to just like hold down the analog stick so you pretend you're asleep so that Santa can sneak past you, so that you don't see him and ruin Christmas. You're being considerate to Santa, right? Like all of these situations. There's a wrestler jumping off the top of the ring who's trying to like slam you front first, and you need to get hit by him to be considerate to him.
And are these like very short mini games, a bit like WarioWare? Okay.
Exactly. They're no longer than 10 seconds, all of them, really. Some of them may be a bit longer, but for the most part they are very short, very quick, like here's a joke almost, and then get out of it. You
sound pretty hot on it.
It's cool and really weird. I don't know. Yeah, it's
Is it just not quite as snappy as WarioWare? What's the actual game element?
Yeah. So I don't think it's trying to be that necessarily. I think it is. There is a weird kind of sincerity to it in terms of, yes, you should be considerate to people, and you should be making sure you're making the right choices here, but sometimes it's not very clear whether you either press the A button to do an action or whether you press up on the analog stick. Your character, or the thing you're controlling, is usually shown in red. There are certain situations where that's not the case. There's one situation where it's like, here's a key witness, she's being interviewed, and you have to move like kind of like a blur thing that blurs people's faces. You have to move this little blur thing over her eyes so that you make her unidentifiable, being considerate to her, like if she's, giving this interview, so she can't be identified, basically. But that's not in red. So when I first did that one, I was like, waiting there, and nothing happened, and then it just moved on. Basically, even if you fail, the game moves on. Like it's not like WarioWare where you lose a life and you have to keep going. The main mode has 100 of these, and so I sat there and did just played all the way through from beginning to end, and at the very end it gives you a score of how considerate you, how empathetic, how well you were able to execute them. It's this kind of it's like, when you get a work evaluation, you got a chart of communication and all these different aspects of your personality. Yeah. It's one of those hexagon things, and it's showing you how good you were at each one. So yeah, at the end of each mini section, which comprises 10 games, it will say moderately considerate or a little vaguely considerate, even in this kind of almost broken Japanese way, to where I didn't often understand how badly or well I had done, because there's no real clarity of okay, but what type of considerate am I supposed to be? Is moderately considerate okay? Is that better than a bit vaguely considerate? I wasn't very sure. And I think playing through it once was okay, I kind of get this now. Then you can do a second playthrough and you understand a bit more what you have to do in certain situations. There's still one that I totally don't understand. There's this guy who's hitting a golf ball and he turns away, and you're just this guy kind of standing in the corner, and I pressed all the buttons and my guy didn't do anything, so I have no idea what's going on with that one. I'm trying to figure it out and look up a YouTube video.
Maybe you have to you have to do nothing in order to let him play the golf shot.
No, but he misses the ball. Like I think what I'm supposed to do is like take the ball away to show, oh yeah, well done, you actually did it, kind of thing. But I don't know how.
Wow, that is like that Japanese concept to a whole new level. Like
yes,
you're
exactly.
Yeah,
no,
I have heard about like this concept in Japanese culture. It is very interesting, and how the word like yeah is like no, and they basically never use the word no. It's always so an example is like if someone asks you like, oh, do you have a cat? And then it'd be like, I might have had a cat once, is basically a way of saying I don't have a cat.
Right.
You know, like it's almost like perceived, and it's also quite gendered, where women are much more much less likely to use the word no than men, and this kind of thing. And it's this, it's very, apparently for Westerners who decide to learn a bit of Japanese and kind of try and speak to people in Japan, it makes the whole process 10 times harder, because they're like, why can't you answer this question? Like it can be very frustrating, but it's really interesting.
Yeah, and I think this game kind of plays on that. It's funny, and it has some really bizarre situations, like as WarioWare often does. But there's also a co-op mode. So I watched the Game Grumps did a video on this, and I was like, oh, this is a weird, obscure game. Surely there's nothing on the internet about it. Type it into YouTube. First thing I see is Game Grumps 1 million views. So I think it's not just James Jones who knows about this series. I guess YouTube is... Honestly, like, it really makes very good YouTube content. It's the type of game that's like weird and quirky enough to do that. And so that I believe there are certain mini games that are co-op only that I didn't come across when I was playing through. And it shows like your compatibility, like how well are you working together in terms of doing these. So, you know, the whole thing took me maybe 35 to 40 minutes to play through beginning to end, but I played a bit more this morning. There's a quick version where you only do 10 mini games in a row, and then it gives you a score at the end. There's the co-op version. Then after you beat the main campaign, there's inconsiderate mode, where you deliberately be rude to everybody and you deliberately go against and try not to complete the mini game, which is funny. So you can play it that way as well. And yeah, for like £2 or whatever, I think this is definitely worth checking out if you're into WarioWare, if you find this concept interesting. It is a little bit out there, and you might be very confused when you first start playing it, but yeah, I'm glad I picked it up. And that there is a second game that's also on Switch, which I'll probably check out at some point in the future. But
do you feel like you're now aware of some of the cultural norms for when you go to Japan? Like you're ready
I don't know, man, because like some of these things are just actually they're not reality, right? like
yeah,
some
imagine
of them
you're on your first trip to Japan, you see someone miss a golf ball and you pick the golf ball for them. And I know that this is the normal thing.
It's like, aha, now, yes, this is Japanese culture. Like one of them is there's a TV show and a guy has a toupee on, and you're both bowing at the end of the show, and his hair falls off, and then as the woman anchor you're playing as, you have to just look away. Like you just turn your head to the left. It's like, I'm not looking at it. I'm just not staring at you at all. Type of deal. Which
it's like I was trying to think of a Western equivalent if like someone has a wardrobe malfunction or your trousers fall down.
Yes,
or something.
exactly.
Like, the polite thing to do is to look away.
Yes, the polite thing is to just ignore it and just don't acknowledge it.
it.
Which definitely very, very funny.
Very
yeah.
funny.
So. Yeah, I mean, I could go through and talk about all of these individual weird things, but, you know, some of it is the surprise.
Would you say you were laughing out loud on occasion with this game, or were you
definitely, yeah. I wouldn't say I was, like, in fits, but it definitely throws things at you where you're just like, this is stupid, you know, and it works really well. It subverts expectations as well. Like it sets up this. There's one set of mini games where you're walking with your girlfriend down the street, and one of them is like, oh, you need to move to the other side so that you're on the side where the cars are, right? Like be polite that way. There's one where you're both walking, and there's a giant poo in the road, and you have to avoid it to make sure neither of you walk in it. So you like walk through the center, so you avoid it basically. And then it subverts that later on, where you're playing as the car, and so you have to modulate your car speed so that you don't go over a puddle at the same time that they're in the way of the puddle. So you basically slow down your car to make sure they walk past, so that you don't go through the puddle and spray them.
It's so interesting. It's so interesting because the busiest station I've ever been in my life was Tokyo Station, and I thought this is going to be a nightmare. Me and Caroline had like big suitcases with us, and even though we were walking past thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people in really congested spaces, I didn't get like jostled or anyone, knocked me by accident a single time. Like, it was unbelievable the amount of care Japanese people put into like giving people their personal space and making sure they're not, bumping into each other. And I just would never have got that in Edinburgh or London or New York, or like it is really interesting. So
there's stuff like you're going up an escalator and you're standing side by side talking to each other, and there's someone who comes up behind you and it's like, oh, you need to step to the right hand side so you can let them pass, which is the type of thing in London people try to do, which is like always stay on the side, and then there are totally people who don't do that, and it sucks.
But there's a much more aggressive nature to it in London.
Yeah, and especially like people just like running up the escalators for sure. So anyway, it's called Kuukiyomi. That's spelled Kuukiyomi. I'm sure I'll have it written in the description.
Look it up in the eShop.
Yeah, look, it'll be on the eShop. There's this one and there's a sequel that's out as well, and they're really cheap. But yeah, I think I would.
When did it come out?
I don't know. This Game Grumps video is from 2020, and I think there's also a Northern Lion video from March 2020. So I think it did come out last year. So that's pretty cool. And yeah, you can check out that game. But that is going to close us out for the first section. We'll be back after the break with some of your emails. Don't go anywhere. We shall return.
Alright everyone, welcome back to the second segment of today's show. It is time for some emails. We put out the call for emails last time and we got some good ones in, but we're gonna get through them again. So that means we need some more. So please email thisnintendolife@gmail.com. That is thisnintendolife@gmail.com if you would like to write in with a question, a comment, a thought about the show. We'd hugely appreciate it, and we can.
Our inbox is a Sarlacc pit, man. Things just go into it and then they disappear, and you just got to fill it up again. You got to feed the beast,
and then they've got to come back 30 years later
with a scar and broken
Disney
armor.
Decided to.
Yeah, exactly.
If you want. Anyway. Our first email this time is from Carolyn Poznan, who says, "Hey MBZ and Bally, whilst listening to last week's show, a question came into my head which I would love to know your answer to. Now, forgive me if you've both been asked this before. Maybe I've not listened enough to your podcast backlog, but humour me if you can. So the question is as follows. Video game characters and their worlds are now as rich as literature or film. It is easy to imagine yourself in those worlds. With that in mind, what video game character would you want to be?"
Okay, and we've got other questions as well, but this is the first one.
Yeah, so pick 3 different characters according to the following characteristics. So the first characteristic, what video game character would you want to be because you admire him, her so much?
Yes, lots of options here. I tend to admire / I like cool characters in video games, right? Like, I think that's something that it's rare to have a cool character who's not like super douchebag and arrogant, and so there's like rare exceptions that those exist. I like Joker from Persona 5, even though he says literally nothing. He just stands there and looks cool, right? Like he's got the glasses and like the dark hair going on, and he's like, yeah, I'm just a cool guy, right? And I think part of it is the style of Persona 5 that makes him look very cool. But it's just kind of effortless, right? He's just like, he goes to school, he's instantly friends with everybody. Everybody loves him, And it would be nice if life was that easy, right? It would be nice if you could just be Joker and just exist at school and just be the coolest person in the world without really having to do anything. So that was one of them that I thought of, was like, even though he's not... Look, he doesn't...
admire him for that.
He has a voice actor. I wouldn't say I admire him necessarily. It's more... I would like if life was that easy for me, you know, if I could just have done that when I was at school. But I don't know if I would have really wanted that, you know. But I do admire his effortless cool. So that's one of mine.
Any more?
Yeah, I mean, I like Dante from Devil May Cry just because he's ridiculous. He also has like effortless cool, right? Like I admire that kind of bent. But I think probably the best example is Geralt of Rivia, because he has like a gruffness about him, right? But he also very much cares, and he like is pretty empathetic towards people's situations and stuff like that. So like, yeah, he goes around and he takes contracts and he gets paid for it, but underneath there is a heart of gold with Geralt of Rivia. So he's probably my number one, I would say, for someone I admire in a video game as a character.
Cool. Mine are very stereotypical. They're very much like people who believe in justice and have overcome adversity and have shown real leadership and these sort. And I think, oh, that's really cool. I want to be like that. So I would go with Arthur Morgan. I think he's one of the most inspiring characters, honestly, in like video games. I think he's incredibly impressive, and he can like manage people around him in a way that I think is very impressive given his circumstances, and he's a real hero, especially by the end of that game. So yeah, Arthur Morgan.
Yeah,
I think someone who's a real leader who really overcomes intense diversity is also Aloy. I think the way that there's lots of geopoliticking going on around in Horizon Zero Dawn, and the way that she kind of gets to the bottom of like her role in that world and the meaning of it and where she comes from, which is a huge part of that game, I really admire. And then another character where the game tells you a lot about what she's gone through, and that's part of the adversity that you overcome, and you're kind of like trying to live that with her, is Senua from Senua's Saga. And I find that also incredibly impressive, because I think you feel, more so than Aloy or Arthur Morgan, I think you genuinely feel, or the game tries to make you feel, a lot of the things that she is going through, more so than Aloy and Arthur Morgan, where it is you're more observing it rather than feeling it yourself necessarily. And I think that is quite important in video games. It's something that you are feeling yourself and not necessarily watching someone else, as it were.
Yeah, you've gone with very
I'm very serious about this.
Well thought out answers. You know, I'm just like, I don't know, Dante. He juggles things and looks cool and wears a hat and does the fucking backwards moon dance. So yes, that's you can see where we're both coming from here.
I overdid this question. There you go. I like those three characters a lot.
Okay, cool. Next one is...
The next point is, what video game character would you want to be because you love the world they inhabit and would love to live there yourself?
So I don't know where this came from, but the thing that instantly popped into my head was the plaza from Nintendo Land. So my first answer was a me from Nintendo Land, because it's basically just a theme park. That plaza is really just fun and bouncy. And you can just go.
Would you not rather hang out in Woohoo Island than, you know, like,
yeah, that is a good point.
The gym and Wii Fit, and Wii Fit is on Woohoo Island. The tennis courts and Wii Sports is there. The boxing ring, getting a plane, fly around the Pilot Wings Resort. So
the life of a me generally is pretty interesting, because you could be in Tomodachi Life one second, you could be on Woohoo Island the next. You know, there's loads of possibilities.
You could wake up the next day with like a different nose.
Yeah, totally, right?
That's like stressful.
It's pretty wild. I think like Animal Crossing is a similar one, you know, in terms of your main Animal Crossing character. Like me and Animal Crossing kind of feel the same vibe to me, in terms of they just live in nice places and just can be chill. But I chose Nintendo Land specifically, I think, because, you know, you wouldn't want to live in a theme park. Because what a great thing. I guess sleeping at night would be hard because all the fucking lights and shit going down. But it's that's definitely a fun one. though. I don't know. Maybe I haven't thought about this too in depth, because if I really was to live in Nintendo Land, I would never be able to escape, because I'm just locked there, right? I'm just like in this hell forever.
I think you would go pretty mad after about 12 hours probably. But
I mean, that music, if the music just constantly played like da 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 da, imagine like that just constantly haunting your dreams.
I think most times trying to get to sleep after having a good Nintendo Land session, that was pretty much what was going around in my head, because that tune is so
when it gets into your head, it will not leave. It will refuse to. And now, good listener, I have forced it into your head as well, and now you'll continue to hear it for the rest of the day. The other ones are, I think, being the main character in a Pokemon game is also a very obvious one. I mean, as kids who grew up on Pokemon, my dream was one day I will own a Pokemon, right? They were going to make real life Pokemon. I was going to go on my own adventure. I don't know what region. I would probably choose Johto. I would imagine that's the one I have the most nostalgia for, and the place
I think the world of Pokemon is really a nice place to be, and as crap as it is,
it's very Japanese influenced as well.
Well, I think it's very crap if you're a Pokemon, but I think as a trainer, it's probably a lot of fun. And I think that the sort of Johto Kanto that we see through stuff like the anime or even the video games, the main character is going through a lot of adverse situations, which I think if you would otherwise live in that world, you probably wouldn't have to go through, which I think is quite appealing. Like most video game characters are going through pretty adverse situations most of the time, because that is what interesting gameplay, story design, whatever you want to call it, is about. But to actually just live in that world without stuff going wrong.
So you're telling me that because Pokemon is so uninteresting and boring, it just makes a much easier place to live, basically?
The Pokemon world is.
Yes, yeah.
It's boring, but I mean, do people actually enjoy going through that much adversity every day?
No.
Exactly. So you kind of, I don't know.
It's chill place, chill vibes. And then the other one is basically just Japan. I was like, what if I was Kiryu just going around Kamurocho the whole time? That would be great. So yeah, less about the character, more about the place. But yes, that would be cool. Although Kiryu fits into the previous question for my answers as well, to be honest. You could just add him to that list of but also he has real sincerity, like very sincere, like will help people out with their problems, and is there as a bro to help you out, but also incredibly strong and powerful, and very cool. So yes.
I kind of went for ones where I thought that's a really nice place to be, but actually if you're in them, like I was saying before, there's a lot of stuff going after you. So places like in the Blind Forest from Ori and the Blind Forest, or
it's a dangerous place, man.
Kong Island from Tropical Freeze, and this place, they look like really nice places to be, but they're probably not that much fun. Or even like the island of Tsushima in Ghost of Tsushima. It's like, that is a beautiful place
gorgeous.
To be, but do I want to be running away from Mongols?
Especially during that time period, right?
Yeah, maybe it's a little bit too brutal. Likewise,
especially all the side quests are like, hey, we're starving, and also my sister got killed, and also like the regular like poverty people in Tsushima seems like they're having a real bad time.
I think to have a good time, not even to have a good time, to survive in that world, you really do have to kind of have Jin's skill set, and that. Yeah,
so you would have to be him, basically.
Yeah, you'd have to be him, or like some superhero or something. But I also think that Breath of the Wild is just the most awesome place to be. I think there's certain towns like Kakariko and Hateno Village in particular.
Gerudo Village is my favorite.
Oh, that's a great. It's a bit hot, but it's fine. Yeah, a bit hot, sandy. I don't like sand. It's not a big fan. But I think that you kind of have to hope that these towns are secure from like the wider Moblin encroachment, and if they are, and I think Hateno generally, like the whole plot point of Hateno is that it's far enough east that it was out of the reach of Ganon and that sort of issue, and I think that's portrayed quite well in Breath of the Wild.
There are a few in like that forest before you get up the hill. There are a few enemies that kind of lurk around that area, so I could see them running in at points. But you're right. Like,
as long as it's not my responsibility as the like police of the town to handle them, I think it would be quite a nice place to be. Totally.
Definitely, yeah.
Okay, the final point is, what video game character are you in reality? Because her personality reflects yours the most.
Okay, so I had a bit of a cheat answer, which was like, I'm Kirby, because I can be anything.
You're a ventriloquist?
No. I think Kirby's an interesting one. I think everyone is Kirby, really. Kirby is like the embodiment of everyone is a different person depending on the situation, you know? Like me talking on this...
embodiment of a people pleaser.
Yeah, basically. Like, I'm a different person on this podcast to who I am with my family, to who I am with friends, to who I am at work, right? Like, every situation called for a different version of you, and that's who Kirby is. Kirby is just a different version whenever, what situation. Like, he needs to go underwater, he's going to suck up a fish person and get the ability to swim, right? Like, Kirby is adaptable to situations. I wouldn't say I don't know. Am I adaptable?
Yeah.
Maybe not.
I don't know.
Kirby is like the everyman choice, but that's not really specific to me.
Okay.
So I would say the answer that is most specific to me is probably Shulk from Xenoblade Chronicles, because he's a bit of a nerd. He can be quiet and awkward, but equally he can be loud and opinionated, depending on the situation.
Yes, you're a combination of those. Yes.
Yeah. So, and I think like that kind of fits me quite well. And he also has a British accent, so it works, right? So
and
I would say
you
Shulk
love
probably...
slaying gods.
Yeah, I love slaying God. I fucking down. I'm an atheist down with gods, right? So it all works, you know, in the grand scheme of things. Makes sense.
I mean, I'm just so good at driving that I should be Master Chief because I can just drive warthogs all day.
Oh, totally. Yeah,
but
exactly. Yeah.
Aside from that, I don't know. I can be a people pleaser. I feel like I'm often, if there's people in a group who have things worse to say against each other, I'll often try and be the person holding it all together. And I like holding a group together. I can play as a leader. I don't have to be a leader. I can be a group member. I like being able to try and just kind of hold the team together in some senses. Like keeping up morale. I don't know. I think that there's a really good character who does this in video games, who is constantly in adverse situations, who is constantly in the situation where their team wants to kill each other, sometimes actually kill each other. And that is Lee Everett from The Walking Dead season 1.
Oh, nice, yeah.
He tries to do good in incredibly difficult situations. He believes in justice. I'm a big believer in justice. Even small injustices drive me up the wall. Like, it really frustrates me, so many things about everything from family and friends to wider society. Like, I just have so much anger against injustice. But, I do think Lee wears his values on his sleeve while at the same time holding a group together. And that game is a really good example of putting you in his position where you're having to make really difficult decisions that massively affect the dynamic of the group. And I think that as someone who likes to make decisions that benefit the dynamic of a group, I feel that a lot with Lee. So
nice. That's a good choice.
Yeah. Cool.
There you go. Now you have gotten under our skin and know us through the lens of video game characters. So there you go. That's a good question.
Our next email is from Chariot Goblin, who says, "Hey TNL crew, in your last episode you briefly talked about what NDCube is likely working on. While they are likely working on a new Mario Party, I feel like many don't realize that they created one of the best Nintendo published games of 2020, Clubhouse Games 51 Worldwide Classics. In Europe it's called 51 Worldwide Classics. It's a successor to the 2006 DS game. Do you think it's possible for the Switch iteration to receive DLC? Could NDCube become the studio that handles the casual games market? Clubhouse Games does have a Wii Sports Play feeling, and its online play is surprisingly great. It's NDCube's best work. Thanks, and keep up the good work."
I really need to pick this game up. I think both of us are very interested in getting it. Just for whatever reason, it passes by. But Bally,
we both picked up the DS game back in 2006, didn't we?
I didn't. You didn't. You were the only one who owned that. Yeah,
because it's a very well-made game, and I feel like there were just so many games like that I picked up at the time, and that I've, in many ways, 51 Worldwide Classics, the game that's just come out, is a very much. It feels like DS old style Nintendo in a way, and
totally.
Of a time, you know. And in that time, we were both generally quite keen on games like that, and I think I've personally grown out of them a lot. Having said that,
I think part of it is also like they are multiplayer focused, and when we were younger and at school together, it was much easier to just do that on a constant basis,
totally.
right? So,
so in this, even though I've grown out of many games like that, I do think this is one that would massively appeal to us and seems to have great online functionality, which is awesome.
yeah, it also, I believe, has the ability to do local play with just one cartridge, but a bit more limited in that sense, kind of like similar to the DS days, right? It's kind of doing a lot of things that the DS did, but still on the system. And I don't think we brought this up when we were talking about games that are handheld style that have kind of gone out of fashion. But yeah, you're right. Like they have made something here that is very appealing to a wide audience. And I think Nintendo, when they go after projects like this, that's kind of what they're aiming after, right? Even stuff like Ring Fit Adventure is trying to cast a bit of a wider net and to get people in who like were on Wii and how do we fit and stuff like that. And this is definitely leaning into the brain training, brain age audience / the kind of, remember when they put books on DS, right? Like you would hold your DS sideways and it was like 52 classic book. Did you own that? I feel like you own that.
I didn't own that. I owned Cooking Mama that you got me, but I also owned like how to cook or cooking something. It had
right, the
recipes
cooking
on it.
recipe one where you would go to the supermarket, you take it with you and you tick off the list of recipes and then you would use it at home to make the meal. I remember you said you did that with your mum a few times.
I did. The mistake we made was we didn't go to the Asian supermarket because that's where all the ingredients are. So
Nintendo definitely played with doing a lot of that stuff back in the day, and it is interesting that they decided to bring this back up. I think partially it's the Switch as a console platform and as a handheld is quite well suited to multiplayer with the ability to break off Joy-Cons and do it in person, right? Play chess against each other or even use the touchscreen to do that stuff, right? It's hilarious that the realization of that Wii U advert of like playing drafts where they like do it on the touchscreen and then tip it and all the drafts fall off the board. Was that drafts? I can't remember what game that was.
Backgammon, I want to say.
I think it might be in Backgammon where they showed that, and like that doesn't get realized until the Switch where they put out this game where I believe you could do that. I'm not sure if you could do the tipping them off the board thing, but still that exists and that's there. But how do you feel about NDCube on this project, Bally? And do you think that they are a potential studio to do some other weird stuff like this for Nintendo?
Yeah, I think we've talked about Nintendo, like they always want to dip a toe into that casual market who will go wild for the likes of Wii Sports, and I think that something that is almost games focused where you can just get it out and play it with a large group of people who aren't that into games is always going to be a market that Nintendo are interested in, because they know that when it goes wild, it can completely revolutionize everything, a bit like Wii Sports did. So I think they're always going to go for that, and I do think they're a good team to keep trying that. So I would presume that a sequel to Worldwide Classics or Worldwide Games, as it's called in Europe apparently, would...
What was the original, like 42 all-time classics?
42 all-time classics, yeah. So they've added 10 in that, well, 9 in that time, I guess. But yeah, I think that they'll just come up with other kind of Wii Play style mini games, but to a Switch audience with Joy-Cons. It probably has online functionality. Like I think that's probably where this is going to go. Having said that, I do think this game has my favorite game from Wii Play, which was the tank stuff. Where
right, I was going to ask, is that in this or is that in Mario Party? Because I can't remember. Like those adverts are blurring together for me. Maybe it is.
There's like a weird selection of actual Wii Play style games in Worldwide Classics. But that game it was perfect analog nunchuck and Wiimote combo where the nunchuck with the analog stick was controlling where the tank was going, but then you'd have the pointer on screen and you could shoot where, like, it was a perfect dual stick shooter kind of implementation of the Wiimote and nunchuck.
And could you only move in 4 directions as well in that game?
No,
I can't remember.
Move in 8, I believe. I can't remember.
Yeah, because I'm just thinking of like as a tank and tank treads. I remember it feeling quite stiff when I played that.
Yeah, it was so much fun though, and got very challenging, and just a really well made, put together little game that I just don't think enough people shouted about Wii Play at the time, and it was very cool. And was incredibly well selling because you got a free Wiimote as part of the game, which everyone wanted at the time.
Exactly, yeah. It's like one of the best-selling games of all time just because people got an extra remote with it.
Yeah.
It's like, man, of course I know I did that, so...
I think we both bought the same games on launch, didn't we? So we all, obviously...
I did get Monkey Ball. Did you get Monkey Ball?
I believe I did. Or if I didn't, I got it soon after launch. I want to say I got it on launch. So I think we both had the same 4 games. Wii Sports, We Play, Twilight Princess, and Monkey Ball.
Yeah. Pretty strong launch for Wii,
totally.
Especially showing off the system. But they definitely will be working on the next Mario Party. I think this one was just way too successful for them not to do a follow-up, right? And yeah, it's weird because Mario Party and 51 Worldwide Classics do have a like kinship in terms of the way that they are made, except for I think a lot more care and attention to detail has gone into each of the board game things, right? Mario Party, to me, often feels like mechanically those individual mini games don't hold up from a control standpoint, right? Back when we were younger, we're like, oh yeah, you just tap A bunch, and it's like, okay, those levels are fine. But the levels where you're kind of doing platforming, where you're running around and jumping, those never felt quite right. And I think partially it's because they just don't have the chops of the proper Mario platforming team, and so like less of that stuff would probably be appreciated in Mario Party. So I wonder if their pedigree in doing a lot more of these kind of sit down board game style experiences translates over to them, you know, doing more of that style of thing in Mario Party. But I don't know if it fits exactly.
Yeah.
You know,
I'm really interested in how 51 Worldwide Classics is sold. I've got the answer as of December 31st, 2020. Do you want to hazard a guess?
Oh boy, things on Switch sell really well, so I would probably go north of my expectation. Feels like it might hit around Fire Emblem numbers, so I'm going to say 3 million.
That's very close, 2.62 million, and it apparently is the 24th best-selling game on Nintendo Switch. So even these games that arguably go under many people's radar are still selling like very well, and like, it's good to see. So obviously Mario Party is like top 10, like huge seller, but
that's brand awareness and brand name for sure that's carrying that.
But it's totally interesting that a game like Worldwide Classics is still selling close to 3 million copies, which is no failure at all, especially with what Nintendo are going for. So yeah, I can see something similar coming out in the future, but as you say, Mario Party is the bigger seller. It's going to come out next, but after that, who knows?
I do wonder, like, you think about the power of Mario as a name, especially on Switch these days. You know, he's always been like one of the biggest brands in the world and just very well known. Do they leverage that, right? Because if they are making Mario Party, you know, 51 Worldwide Classics, not really a great name of a video game. I don't think it's very clear.
You could merge the two together somehow.
Yeah, I don't think it's clear that Nintendo have made that. You know, for most people, they would just look at that and be like, oh, that's just like a weird board game collection. It doesn't, even though like it clearly has the polish and the sheen of a first-party title, people don't get gravitated towards it because it's almost quite boring in a way. You know, you look at the box art, you look at the way that it's marketed,
and it's not been completely labeled with Mii's either. You know, that was what Nintendo used to do. A game like We Play,
yeah,
for example.
It's almost just completely bereft of personality, which is why I wonder, like, what if you rebranded it as like Mario board games, right? Something along those lines, and you don't have to do that much to change up the look of it. You can even just be like, okay, we're playing chess, but all the chess pieces have Mario characters as heads or whatever, you know. You can lightly theme it so that it still retains the core of what makes it just focusing on the games, but by putting the Mario branding on it, you instantly elevate it to a lot more people's radar, and therefore give it a better shot at selling in the market.
You're making me think of the card games that you would play in Luigi's Casino in Mario 64 DS, where it's like there's 5 or 6 games where, and they're traditional kind of card games like 21 or Texas Hold'em, but they just replaced them with like you know, Mario things like stars and mushrooms. And
Mario's the king and Luigi's the queen or whatever, and Peach is the queen and the Joker cards, and they just use their faces to overlay the actual... Or do they even do that? I can't remember if they even did that. But
it was just flowers, stars. There was like a match 'em game with Peach's face, Bowser's face and stuff, but they're also cards. And yeah, it was just a really great utilization where Luigi was just on the top screen staring at you and doing all these animations, which at the time were just really cool to have like 3D rendered animations on a handheld. But then you had the touch screen of a casino like green table mat like in front of you that you would have the touch screen to click on the cards, which it was just a really nice thing at the time. I don't think it would work in the same way today, but it worked then, and they could do something similar.
Yeah, it's interesting because Chariot Goblin asks, do we think that it's going to get DLC? And 2.6 million copies, that's like on the verge of getting DLC, because Fire Emblem got it, right? And that sold around that many by the time they had announced DLC. Or maybe I guess it was, because they announced the DLC early the next year. And that game is over 3 million now. So I don't think it's out of the realm of getting additional support. I wonder if that could be a way in which they start integrating the Mario stuff, is to do it via DLC, potentially.
Yeah.
But
or whether they
just
knows? Move those ideas into another game, or I don't know. But yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely, you can see this studio starting to, or continuing to go down those lines of, iterating on this and making a successor game, or even, something in a similar vein. Because NDCube has never struck me as the first party studio that is the most, or I guess they first party, I guess they are like owned in some senses by Nintendo. They are a studio under their control to whatever degree, but are they as polished a studio as the other kind of core Nintendo ones? I tend to not think so. When I think about them, I think of not shoddy products, but like, oh, okay, they kind of like made those weird Mario and Luigi March of the Minis stuff, didn't they? I'm pretty sure that's them.
There's always a layer of polish on the top tier Nintendo when you're talking about Mario, Zelda, that is arguably unlike anything else in the video game industry, maybe aside from a handful of Sony first parties, or depending on your opinion. But like, they're a very rare breed in the grand scheme of the video game landscape. And yes, Nintendo put out a lot of games that don't have the absolute creme de la creme polish of their top tier. That they just need to get out there to make money, to have a diversity of ideas out there and mix it up a bit. Yeah,
I guess what I'm saying is, like, from what I've seen, with a project that is smaller in scope like this, it seems to actually have that kind of high quality Nintendo polish to it, and I think it is because they're not making a big higher budget game. So I think that's partially why the Mario Party games feel a little underpolished, is because the scope is maybe slightly larger than what this team is necessarily fully capable of, but they still do a good job, right? Like, they replicate that stuff really well, and they seem to have a good handle on the IP, and so I would be fully confident in them like adapting it to this style of game. Very cool.
But thank you very much for your email, Chariot Goblin. Our next email is from B King, who's from Sweden, and says, "Hey guys, seeing the whole Cyberpunk 2077 situation unfold, I'm really starting to wonder how companies like CD Projekt Red keep finding themselves having to enforce crunch on their employees to try to reach a deadline they had set for themselves. In this particular case, the game still seems to have a lot of bugs and performance-related problems, especially on the base consoles. It seems clear to me and everyone else that the game probably should have been delayed even further, and also puts into perspective how ridiculous their initial release date of April was last year. I just don't understand why game companies have to come out with release dates so early before they know 100% that the game in fact will be ready in time and runs as well as they would have liked. There are obviously investors and stakeholders and whatnot behind the scenes putting pressure on developers to release a game so their investment can turn into a profit, but I just don't see any evidence of this being a good strategy whatsoever. Different outlets such as PC Gamer have reported that CD Projekt made a profit within 1 day after a development cycle of 8 years. So sure, it was a success and everyone got their investment back, but I feel like this is a very short-sighted approach. Surely their profit could have been even bigger if the game was released later next year without any bugs, hitting acceptable performance on all platforms, no controversy around crunch, better reviews, and ultimately a healthier staff mentality, meaning that talented developers will want to stay at the company and possibly attract even more talent in the future. I study social sustainability at the moment, and from that perspective and a more long-term view, I just don't see why situations like this keep happening all around the industry. There's even an argument to be made that the sheer amount of games being released every year would mean that there should be an even bigger focus on the game's quality for it not to get forgotten about or skipped entirely by players because of other releases. What is your perspective on crunch and rushed releases? Is it preventable, and do you think more companies will try and minimize this in the future, or is it something that will always plague the industry? Keep up the good work. Greetings from Sweden.
Oh, big topic. Crunch. We love it, we hate it. No, we don't love it, we hate it. It's bad, it's terrible. So yeah, I think all of these points that BK makes are very lucid and make a lot of sense, right? And we kind of wonder, like, why, right? If this all makes sense and this, like, is logical, why does this keep happening? Why do we continue to see these stories happen and continue to see the narrative get perpetuated that crunch is necessary and you got to do it and things like that from the big game studios? It's multiple failures, and I think part of it is when we're talking about the stock market and investors, that's the problem, right? Like, that is like one of the core issues here with CD Projekt Red, I think, is because their investors and their stakeholders have a very short-term view in terms of they want to make money now and they want to make money fast. And we see this all the time in the stock market with, like, the Pokemon Go situation, for example, where Pokemon Go blows up and then all these investors start investing in Nintendo, despite the fact that they don't fully own the IP and they're only getting, like, small dividends of the vast majority of the profit that goes to Niantic and the Pokemon Company, which are separate entities. And so it's like this lack of knowledge, lack of information, which continues to show, especially now with the GameStop situation that has been happening, of like, this is all fake, it's all just made up by the rich people and they are just kind of manipulating it themselves to make a bunch of money. Yes, investors, very short-sighted and very much like want money now, not tomorrow. They want it yesterday, in fact, is kind of like the way that mentality works. So even with a game like this, right, like there is a huge amount of pressure up top for them to just get it out and get it sorted. And a lot of things have to come together for that, right? Like when you think about the marketing push for a game as big as this, they have deals set up with other companies to have, here's a brand tie-in that happens with an energy drink, that happens with, crisp packets. You can get like a code to redeem a skin. All those things have to be set up so far in advance that the continued delay of that stuff is very costly to a company if they delay. The situation with Microsoft you see with Halo Infinite, where they had all these brand deals set up and all this stuff that came out related to Halo Infinite, despite the game not releasing, it still all had to happen because all those deals were inked and they were kind of set in stone. The difference with Microsoft is that they literally, like, money is no object to that company, right? Like, they are one of the richest companies in the world. They can afford to do that. CD Projekt Red, very rich, but they probably look at the situation and think, look, we probably can't afford to keep delaying this, even though in reality, right, if all the big people at the top, weren't paid as much and they actually pay their employees a proper living wage, they wouldn't have to chase, growth after growth after growth. It is kind of why that happens, right? And so in order to meet those deadlines, in order to hit it, they have to continue they feel like they need to crunch in order to get things done. But what does crunch do? It leads to people being burned out. It leads to people being tired and therefore less good at their job, therefore not catching bugs when they maybe could have done before, not being able to have the energy to even put into making the game better. It really, look, as with all these questions, the answer is capitalism, right? Like, at the fucking end of the day, that's the answer.
But that's where it's hardest to stop in its tracks. In that, if the aim of if you're a big company, AAA development studio, the aim is in some parts twofold. The main one is make money, sell well. But I think a little one below that is, in some part, is that a lot of these companies want critically acclaimed games. Like, they want well-made, good things that are going to get the high 90s, mid 90s, Metacritic, whatever, OpenCritic, to say, hey, we made a really great game. And we know that I would even argue more often than not in situations of crunch, especially amongst the top tier AAA development studios, they are still producing very high quality, well-reviewed games like Last of Us Part 2, for example, last year.
And that's the issue, right? Is like, yes, you have a Cyberpunk, but you also have Last of Us Part 2 last year, which probably had equally terrible crunch, and yet you now have that as a multi-game of the most awarded Game of the Year nomination of all time.
Exactly. And if you're a Sony investor, your boxes are ticked. More of the same, please. Naughty Dog, make your next game, whether that's Last of Us, Uncharted, or something new. Doesn't really bother them. They just want a critically acclaimed game, and they want it to sell well. And they are in a position where they have a very high likelihood of doing that.
Right. It's also very different for Sony as a much bigger company, as a company with multiple arms of technology and like markets that they work within. Obviously, games is a large part of their company, but they also have the ability, because they are so big, to give Naughty Dog as much time as they need to actually finish the game fully and make sure that when they release it, it doesn't like embarrass the entire company, right?
Yeah.
And it seemed like CD Projekt management wise just wasn't there at all. In terms of, I think part of it as well is they announced this game years and years before they even started working on it. And so to the outside consumer, it seems like it's been a decade, but in reality, they've only been working on it for like 4 years, really, right? I believe 2016 was what was cited as when they actually started full development on the game. So it's, that's not long enough to create a brand new IP that's trying to be the scope of a Rockstar game, that is trying to have all the depth and like push the boundaries. You just can't do it, especially with a team size that CD Projekt Red has, which is a fraction of, you look at Ubisoft and their teams of thousands and thousands of people making Assassin's Creed, and they were trying to make a game in the same scope as that with a fraction of the number of people. It just was never going to work when you really think about it.
Yeah. And I think Beaking's point about like marketing push and this sort of thing, I think we've seen what happens when those deadlines aren't met and the marketing is all in full flow, where you've seen all these things with Halo Infinite from the end of last year, where there's like all these Burger King offers and stuff. And I'd even argue I think the UK has slightly fewer of those deals, especially like tie-ins when it comes to films and video game promotion.
Yeah, they tend to be focused more on the American market.
Yeah, much more American, but that will have been a huge sink of money for like Microsoft and all that promotion of Halo Infinite at the time when the game's not even out. And
right, and theoretically they have to pay that again when they actually release the game if they want to continue that same level of marketing hype behind
it. So if you're a big company like Microsoft, you want it all in line, and there are some points where that roller coaster is already over the hill where you can't pull out of those contracts and you're kind of stuck and you're going to have to spend that money again. So my point on that is that they have not delayed a game like Halo Infinite lightly, and sure, it will probably lead to more crunch, although I don't have a good understanding of 343's crunch situations and this sort of thing, but it surely can't be good. Video game delays are not good for crunch either. Like it's not like, yes, it might be better for the game, but for the actual working conditions of everyone there, it's not going to necessarily help. And as I said, as long as crunch is leading to good games that sell well, nothing's going to change until you have better regulations, you have better trade unions, you have better power coming from the bottom up that can actually say, you know what, we're going to go on strike. We're not making this game until these conditions are better. Mm-hmm. And yes, a developer like Naughty Dog, I believe, have lost a ton of talent with people being burned out and leaving the company. And I am genuinely interested if Naughty Dog can bring in the same level of talent, because I mean, arguably they probably will, because everyone wants to work for Naughty Dog in the industry, because they're so well renowned in terms of success, not in terms of crunch. And that's a thing that's going to keep perpetuating itself, where if someone's willing to give up their working conditions to get the role, which I think they probably are in a lot of video game development circumstances, it's very hard to see the solution to this situation. And I should always say that we know very little. I always mention this when we talk about crunch. We know barely anything about Nintendo's situation in terms of crunch.
Absolutely.
And although they never get dragged across the coals like CD Projekt Red or Naughty Dog do, I think that is by and large because they are Nintendo and they are very Japanese and inward looking and will not interview anyone and will feel under pressure to interview, both from a cultural perspective and everything. So I just think we should never let Nintendo off the hook when, by and large, it's very likely that they are under just as bad, if not worse, conditions when it comes to crunch and workload.
Absolutely. I think it is one of those things, you hear about Japan's work culture. It's like, to me, it's almost completely obvious that they do the same, if not worse, in Japan, just because the way that their society is built. But the other thing is, like, Nintendo did say, like, before Animal Crossing was delayed, they were like, they made a statement about not wanting to push their employees too much, which I question as like a PR thing versus the reality of the situation, because no one can really rebut it, because we don't know. There's no way to get inside their development and understand whether that is really what they are doing. But the other thing is, like, when people say that, when this game got delayed, Jason Schreier was talking about how, okay, great, like, everyone's like, great, they're getting delayed, less crunch, right? And what he was saying was like, no, it just means crunching for longer. It just means, okay, you need to keep doing this at the same pace, but for a more extended period of time, because the game just isn't there yet, and it needs to have that amount of time put into it, I guess, because of poor management and just the inability to schedule correctly and to know what is needed. And it seems in games that there's always more than you realize when you're on a big project. And I don't know how we solve that aside from, being able to afford more time and a better kind of balance. To people.
I think one other route that could make the situation better is the media being harsher on the companies crunching. And like I've said this before, but I do really strongly believe the video game industry feels way too cozy. And what I mean by that is, sure, Last of Us Part 2 is a great game, but then, Neil Druckmann goes on a fucking tour of all the podcasts and talks about his game, and there's maybe like one question in 20 that's vaguely about crunch, and that game's still getting all the promotion, wins Game of the Year. I prefer Last of Us Part 2 to Hades personally, but I wanted Hades to win Game of the Year because it's not about necessarily even the end product. It's about what it means that a game where there has been a clear demonstration of its work practices in, Daniel Dwyer's documentary series about how that game was made, and the work culture of that game, and the fact that they're obviously an indie studio, they're not a AAA, but I would love to see these games that are made with constructive work cultures actually win these Game of the Year awards. And it's great that Hades won IGN and won loads of other awards. That was fantastic. But let's not just shout about how good Hades is. Let's shout out about how great Supergiant are. The fact that they have such great work practices. And even though so many people said how good Hades was, I think the media generally could have done a better job at shouting about how good their work culture is, and contrasting that in a year with Last of Us Part 2, where the work culture is clearly awful. And I think that's not shouted about enough. And we love games, we want to talk about games, but we need to talk more about the culture behind games. And as long as the media are doing their cozy interviews with the developers of these big AAA games that are crunching their asses off, I think that is part of the problem, and we need to call a spade a spade. When it's bad, it's bad. Totally.
I think so many of these places, especially the smaller sites, they all constantly live in fear of losing access, right? Like, if you have the in with Sony PR and you're getting review codes that you can put up on day one and make sure that your website is getting the traffic for the big game review, you're not going to be as willing to rock the boat, right? Like, and I think that's the nice thing about places like Kotaku, is that they don't fucking give a shit, but they're also in a place where they are one of the largest sites. They can kind of afford to do that, right? Like, they can afford to be blacklisted by Bethesda, and actually ask them hard-hitting questions and all that type of stuff, versus a smaller site that can't necessarily afford that because their entire business is built on their access, right? If they don't have a day one review of Last of Us, well, then all their traffic disappears, right? They don't get the same amount of views on other stuff.
Everyone wants their site to be successful. Everyone, especially those who are making a living out of these sites, it's important that they can, if there is some possibility to speak truth to power while at the same time making money to run a successful business, a successful website, obviously that's the ideal. But so often, as you say, those two things clash, and it's a real shame, because I do think that these AAA developers, many of which are crunching, are getting away with way too much, and the quality of the games that they're putting out too often is blinding people to the reality of the situation, which is a real shame. Real shame.
Yeah, totally. The other last thing I wanted to bring up regarding Supergiant, which I think is great, that all their work culture stuff is fantastic, and I think more people should try and do that. The only caveat I will have is, like, they are a pre-existing successful indie studio, right? So they have had games which have sold very well, and therefore they continue to sell well, and therefore they have a sustainable income, which allows them to pay their workers fairly, and it allows them to continue to work without the pressure of when do we have to release this soon, right? Like, they could take their time with Hades, and they were able to do that because they have that blanket of safety that is all their games still selling, and they being a name already that's established in the industry. They have.
Do you think arguably they had to crunch to get to that point?
Oh, no doubt, right? When you think about 7 people, the original Supergiant making Bastion, of course that would have been filled with crunch, but it's different in that sense because it is very much a personal, like, they are all super invested because they are the people who made the company, and so they are going to be willing, you know, it's like when you hear about Rockstar and like the houses and like, oh well, we did 100-hour weeks, and it's like, well, yes, you're being paid fucking millions of pounds, and so if you want to do that, fine, but you're like instituting that across a company of thousands of people and instituting that kind of work culture across everybody, that's where the problem is. And I think that's the good thing what Supergiant did was, sure, they probably did do a bunch of that when Bastion was being made, but as soon as they're employing other people who don't like have ownership stake in the company, you know, they can't continue to have that type of work-life balance, because it puts pressure on those people lower down in the company to be like, oh, if my bosses are doing this, then therefore I should be doing it as well, right? Like, you have to lead from the top when it comes to that type of culture, because if you don't, then everyone else will by proxy do it as a result of peer pressure and just pressure within the company, because that's what is done, you know? So yeah, it'll be different situations for different places, but I do think that they are fortunate in some way to be able to do that, and not everyone, like, not every independent person who's working on a small game has that luxury. But then, you know, it depends, right? Like the guy who made Cyber Shadow, I'm sure he crunched a ton, but it's his sole project. He's the only person working on it. Stardew Valley, same thing, right? Like if it's your one thing, the one thing you want to do, obviously you need to try and take care of yourself as much as possible, but there's no one else who is beholden to you in that way, right? So it's a little different when you talk about that, but
I'd love to see an award at the Game Awards that was, you know, what's the award they already have? It's like best best team direction or something.
Direction? I think it's just direction. Game direction.
What if it was like, you know, best team
studio culture or something?
Studio culture, right? Exactly. And it doesn't have to be a big middle finger to the likes of Naughty Dog necessarily. It's just a way of shining a light on those who are already getting their work cultures in good order. And, you know, Jeff Keighley's not going to suddenly pull out of his ass and decide to do it. But if enough people decide, hey, you know what, we need to shine a light on these things, someone else with some sort of awards platform could do that, you know, and... yeah, we could try it. I don't know. It's
a really tricky one to do, because I don't think the media or even people outside of studios and game development are well equipped to necessarily know, right? Like, all we know is what we get told, and all we know is what gets leaked from the inside of, like, how is it going at Blizzard and things like this, right? We don't, on the ground, really know what's going on. So I think that would probably have to be an award that is done by talking to people who work at these companies, and you know, there are awards that go around all the time of like, what are the best companies to work for from their employees and stuff like this.
Yeah, it's ultimately why you need regulations and rules to stop these things. Like, how do you know that the shirt that you're wearing right now isn't made in, you know, a sweatshop, this sort of thing, in somewhere,
exactly,
like Thailand, Bangladesh, wherever. Like, how do you know that that's not happening? It's through laws and regulations at an international level, and like the game industry in some respects shouldn't be any different. Like, there needs to be rules around what companies can and can't do, regardless of how open or closed they want their door to be.
Yeah, totally. It's kind of wild, and I think we're going to continue to see stories like this, but I think the more stories that come out like this, the better as a whole, because it starts to get exposed, and, you know, like, people are not going to let these companies off lightly. I think one of the benefits of the CD Projekt Red situation is I think it's really scared a lot of companies into how big of a blow up things like this can be if, you know, they continue. And I don't know if that necessarily helps the crunch situation. I think what it does do is it makes sure that people or companies do not want to put out a game release like this, because it has irrevocably damaged their reputation. They went from one of the most beloved developers in the industry to a laughingstock within the space of like 3 days. It was insane how quickly their reputation just tanked to the bottom. And that's got to be very scary for a lot of big companies out there, right? Like, you don't want to be a CD Projekt Red. You just do not want that to happen. So is it preventable? Can we continue to make things like this stop happening? I think eventually, yes, but we do, as you said, need to have those worker protections in there, right? Like, the video game industry needs to unionize. Like, it is one of the most important things, because that is where you can start taking power away from, you know, all these people in charge, in some senses. It's rough times.
It's going to keep rumbling on.
It's going to keep rumbling on. Yeah. And here's the thing, right? Like, even with disasters, we have seen time and again that there is the possibility for it to reverse, in terms of the quality of the game itself. Not that that helps the situation of the people making it. It probably makes it worse in many senses. You know, think of No Man's Sky, how much they had to do to that game to get it to a place where people even like it now. Similar thing with Final Fantasy XIV, just a complete fucking disaster, and it's now probably the best MMO out there, like, by all accounts, from what people say, is like the gold standard for MMOs these days, which is wild. The turnaround, that's probably the wildest turnaround of all. But then you also have things like Anthem, which, like, it looks like that might just get shuttered now, and they won't even put out their potential Anthem Next, or whatever it was going to be called. And so all these developers who have worked on it to just try and turn it around, well, they just decided it's not anymore. It's just not going to happen. So equally, you know, these situations can get turned around, but equally, you know, they can just disappear, and that failure you have just continues to be one. So, yes. Yeah. Tricky situations all around. But that is going to close us out for the email segment. Thanks, everyone, for writing in. Of course, though, we need some more, because we just did some emails, so we need to fill up the inbox a little bit, and that would be nice. You can write them to Discord, but you can also write them to our email address, which is, Bally?
ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. That is ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. Please send in your emails.
Yes, absolutely. That'll be good. Cool. So, a couple of things at the end of the show here. We have decided to do another backlog club. Obviously, we have been doing
our 9th backlog club.
Yes. We've been doing the kind of Mario celebration, which is similar in some ways, but I think the structure of that was slightly different. But we're going to go back to a traditional good old backlog club where we dive deeply into a game, discuss it, and get your thoughts on it to write into the show. And it's finally time, Bally. We've had this one on the cooker for a while, and we've been meaning to get around to it. But I think we needed a bit of an RPG break. At least you did for a little while.
I did.
But we're back, baby. It's time for the Mario RPG Backlog Club, which is a kind of a nice end cap in some ways to the Mario 35 stuff that we've been doing. And yeah, we got some good RPGs to dig into, which neither of us have finished. I've watched some of these, but not fully played them, and I've dipped my toe in a little bit. But the nominations, we have 3 choices to nominate for this Backlog Club, and they are, Bally.
They are Paper Mario on the N64, Mario RPG from the Super Nintendo, and Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga on the Game Boy Advance. I should say Paper Mario 64 is available on the Wii U Virtual Console. Mario RPG is available there, as well as the SNES Classic, I believe. And then Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga is also available on the Wii U Virtual Console. Do you all remember that thing, the Wii U Virtual Console?
What a thing.
It's been a while since we've talked about that.
Yes, indeed. So we will put up a poll on our Patreon. So anyone who is a patron can go ahead and vote. And we will give you 2 weeks, so between this show and next show, to vote, and then we'll probably give a bit of time before we actually talk about the games, because they're all RPGs. They all have a decent length of them, although not as long as regular RPGs are, which is nice. But yes, you can head over to patreon.com/ThisNintendoLife. We'll put a link in. Obviously, there's always a link to the Patreon in the show, so you can go there and check it out if you would like to become a patron. But patrons get to vote for our Backlog Club choices. And so that will be live when this episode is up. You'll have 2 weeks to do so. And yeah, I'm excited, Bally. It's definitely, I have dipped into Mario RPGs in the past, but I think I have ended up playing ones that people are not that big a fan of, right? Like, I played the second Mario and Luigi game and then the fourth one, both of which are considered...
Oh, you were not happy about that Luigi one, were you?
Mario and Luigi Dream Team Brothers, one of maybe the worst 3DS game I played. I wouldn't say it's...
I think it was like 40 hours long or something. That was your biggest issue.
Yes. Oh my god. Agonizingly fucking long. That game. Also, I hate the art style that they did for those games on 3DS. We should also mention, if you do want to play the weird art style Superstar Saga, that is available on 3DS as a remake. I don't know, man. I don't know. It depends on what wins, obviously. So we'll see. But yes,
you obviously played Paper Mario and can't remember the surname from last year. What's it?
The Origami King, which is not really an RPG. I also played
RPG.
Sticker Star. So yeah, I've got a great track record here for like the least favorite in these series that I've played. Like Superstar Saga and Bowser's Inside Story are often held up as the really good ones of those, and I've not played either of those.
Okay.
And then Paper Mario 1 and Paper Mario 2 are held up as the best of those, and I haven't played either of those either. So yeah, I don't have a great track record when it comes to these series, so I'm excited to play a good one. At least what the general consensus is as a good one of these. So
yeah, people love that first Paper Mario, so yeah, I'm looking forward to play that. But we will play whatever you vote for.
We'll play what you vote for, Bal. You can't say you're looking forward to playing that, because
whatever you vote for. So yeah,
it's in the hands of the audience.
We've talked about a losers bracket in the past, and like the games that lose are not gone and forgotten. We have them all in a spread, a Google Doc. So we will eventually do a losers bracket where you can see one of the losers finally win, and we will play that game.
Will we ever play Kirby Triple Deluxe, Bally? I think it's been
defeated about 2 or 3 times at this stage. Yeah. So if people don't want to see it, they don't want to see it. You can't argue with democracy.
No, very true, very true. So you can head over to patreon.com/ThisNintendoLife. We also have some patrons we'd like to thank, Bally.
Yes, thank you so much to our $10 tier patrons. They are Zach S, Atari Alex, Thomas, Matthew, and my fiance Caroline. Thank you all for your $10 tier support. We obviously have loads of episodes of This Nintendo Life on the go. Our most recent episode, we were talking about a couple of games we've been playing. And
we continue the Halo Yakuza train.
Yakuza
we
train.
Continue to talk about those.
So that train will continue. But yeah, you can access all those episodes of This Nintendo Life for $1. And that, if you want to subscribe now, that will also give you the chance to vote in this backlog club. So you can have a say in what game we play next.
Absolutely. Cool. You can find the show all over the shop. We're all over the place. We're on Spotify, we're on Stitcher, we're on we're not on SoundCloud, but maybe. I think that's just more a place where you just host things.
Is that a thing these days, SoundCloud?
SoundCloud exists. You got to pay for it, which is why I didn't want to do SoundCloud, because SoundCloud is more for musicians doing albums, right? Because they're like, okay, we have a 2-hour limit or 3-hour limit, and I'm like, that's fucking one podcast, mate. That's not enough for me. So not really well built with podcasters in mind. But yes, you can, any podcasting app you have, you can find us there and go and find the show and subscribe to it, review us on iTunes, all that good stuff. And yeah, so you can find us also on the internet, Mally. They can find me at Lord NBZ. Where can they find you?
I'm on Twitter at Ballyman91. That's BALLYMAN91. I need to get back in the Twitter game. Not been tweeting.
I think you've been saying that for like 9 shows in a row, Bally. So who
my
knows?
tweets are only just games I've beaten, like back to back. It's like, right, I beat a game here, beat another game. Here we go.
One day you just got to take a day Bally, we'll call it Bally's Twitter Day, and I'm like, Bally, you got to post 19 tweets on this day, and you just got to do it. You just got to throw out opinions, talk about I just went in the shower. Like, people tweet whatever.
I mean, to be honest, the Nintendo news right now has been a little bit slim, so
a little bit.
It's not all on me. It's not all on me.
Yeah, no, true. That's true. Cool. You can obviously find the podcast Twitter at TNL Podcast. It's got links to our Discord community, our YouTube channel that you can go and check out if you want to listen over there instead, and all that good stuff. And yeah, you can go and join our Discord as well. I don't think we promote that you can go and join it that much, but yes, there's always a link in the description with an invite to the Discord, so you can click that and jump in, and some people there chatting about Nintendo and other things, and it's a good time. So head on over.
You've started a little channel, MBZ, where everyone can discuss books.
Yes, mainly fantasy stuff, but yes, there's some other books being discussed there as well. But yeah, I've got to bring all my loves to the Discord, and that is my current one. So that's what's going on there. So if you want to talk about the Stormlight Archive with me, I am fucking down to write pages and pages of chat with you about that. Fantastic. That will close us out for this episode. Thanks everyone for listening. We'll be back in a couple of weeks' time with some more video games and Nintendo stuff. Until then, we'll see you very soon. Bye-bye, folks. The musical interlude used on today's show was Bird of Paradise from Donut County. Copyright Annapurna 2018.